Until they bring the streetcars back, Chapter 31. On Monday, Gretchen slid along the row behind me in study hall and settled in her seat. I turned and whispered, "What was your dad doing here? He was sick. He got off early and didn't want to come back for me." "Did he recognize me?" "I don't know." "He was at the basketball game Thursday night," I said. "Basketball game? What time?" "Oh, around 8:39. I think he was home," she said with a puzzled expression. "Are you sure?" "I saw him staring at me," I said. "Does he still go for walks at night?" "Yes, but sometimes he goes out the front door now. Maybe he went out early Thursday night." "No, I think he stayed home. He was sick." Geez, now I was even more confused than ever, like I couldn't believe my own eyes. I felt like the shadow or something, ducking Letterman all week. I rode the streetcar to school and back instead of hitching, and I bombed home right after school. I didn't go to the high wire sorority meetings Tuesday night, and on the phone I told Lola I was feeling kind of sick and we didn't go out Friday night. I zigzagged all over the neighborhood getting home so he couldn't find out where I lived, and I stayed out of sight in our apartment. On Saturday, I took a roundabout way to work, through alleys and yards, worrying that Letterman recognized me as the kid in the truck behind the bakery. At work, there were no orders to pick up liquor, and I slammed a box of groceries back into the back of the truck with the darn luck. I had named my planned rat trap in honor of Gretchen's father, and I knew I had to get it done. I decided to stop behind the liquor store anyway, figuring I could ask Sid if there was any deliveries, like I'd forgotten to check with Mr. Finley. When I got there, Sid was waiting on some customers up front, and I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a case of Schneely whiskey and hauled it to the truck. Geez, every pore was seeping sweat, and my heart was pounding. But I blasted up the concrete steps of the loading dock back into the storeroom. I snatched a case of old granddad bourbon and stumbled to the truck like a guy saving stuff for a house fire. Without looking back, I careened up the ice-rutted alley rather than out onto Pryor where Sid might spot the truck. I shouted, "Two cases," and Sid didn't know I'd been there. When I got to the hideout, three grade school kids were dorking around in the alley, and I waited about 5 minutes until they finally headed for the railroad tracks. When they were out of sight, I stashed the two cases in the deserted garage. With every week, I knew the chance of some kid finding the booze went up, and I hated to think of coming for it in the middle of Rat Trap and finding the liquor gone, like trying to light a stick of dynamite with a train roaring down on you and finding you'd lost your matches. With cardboard, old shingles, and rags, I covered the six cases of what looked like a worthless pile of junk, and then I took off, knowing it would be a disaster if anyone spotted me around the old garage. I finished dressing for the hayride when my mother stepped into my room with one roller in her hair and a sadness in her eyes. "I know you must be disappointed that your father didn't go to your games, Calvin." "Yeah, it's okay. Do you know why he didn't?" "I don't know," I snapped. "He was tired. He wasn't feeling good. There wasn't any time without a car." I pulled on my jacket and zipped in my anger, and I wanted to get out of there. "I think he's jealous," my mother said quietly. Jealous? That was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. "Not so much of you as what you were doing." My mother stepped into the doorway, blocking my escape. Geez, I hated talking about stuff like that. "I gotta go. Did you know that he went to Central too?" "No, he never told me that." I couldn't believe it. My dad went to Central? He did, and every day after school he walked downtown and worked for 3 or 4 hours, the whole time he went to high school. He never got to play sports, and he wanted to so badly. He once told me that he could always outrun and outhit his boyhood friends. He was a natural athlete. She paused for a minute. "So I think it was just too hard for him to go and watch you and remember all that he missed out on. Do you see, Calvin? It wasn't you." "Yeah, I guess so." My voice was choking up. "Don't blame him," she said. "I don't blame anybody." I slid past her in the doorway. "I gotta go." It was getting dark when the eight of us crept up the bank towards the porch of the spooky house like little kids, shoving and tugging and laughing nervously. I told Steve I had to run an errand for my mom and had him pick me up over at the drugstore on Shelby after I sneaked out of the apartment and made my way through the yards and alleys. We were dressed for a moonlight hayride, and they all wanted to tempt fate and thumb their noses at the terror of Summit Avenue one more time, and I wished I could tell them who'd been chasing me. We pussyfooted onto the porch, and you could see a faint light from behind the drapes. Isn't this mean? Lola asked on her first trip to the porch. Nah, it keeps the old guy going, Steve said. He loves chasing us. Steve was with Jean, a veteran of the game, along with Jerry and Sally, and Scott and Katie were bouncing up and down like they wondered if they weren't tempting fate once too often. Inches from the large wood door, we milled and pushed and nudged one another, and no one had the guts to knock, like we knew that the scary time just before it happened was as much fun as being chased. Steve couldn't stand it, and he pounded on the door like a bill collector. Sally and Lola broke for the steps, but Jerry and I grabbed them and held them on the porch. I'm scared, Lola said. That's what's the fun, Jerry said. All 8 of us stood there quietly laughing, except the runner, who to come blasting out of the door any second. Nothing happened. Knock again, Steve said. He didn't hear us. Jerry stepped up, dragging Sally with him, and pounded again while we all braced ourselves with one eye on the door and one foot pointed toward the street. The latch clicked, and Steve and the girls flew off the porch like a convoy of partridge, while Scott and Jerry and I retreated to the wide concrete steps with our eyes riveted on the door. It opened slowly, and a small woman showed up in the doorway alone. We hung there like dorks, trying to think of what to do next, and then Scott, always one with the manners, stepped towards the door. Hello, does Mike Burt live here? No, not here, the woman said softly. Jerry and I moved up beside Scott, and I looked past her into the house. In a wheelchair, with the left side of his face slack and droopy, and an Afghan over his lap, the runner slumped like he'd been shot. Sorry to bother you, ma'am, Scott said. We must have the wrong house. We turned and started down the steps. He'd chase you if he could, she said. Holy Moses! We were bayoneted by the words, and we did an about-face. Yes, ma'am, Scott said. We're sorry. We drove out Lexington for a Circle S ranch and jabbered about the times the runner had scared the noodles out of us, about Sandy's famous dash, already exaggerating like crazy. Under a railroad bridge, everyone held a hand on the roof, making a wish, and Steve leaned on the horn, and the Chevy yodeled a 2-note song and blasted our secret hopes out towards the moon. We actually had moonlight, and while we snuggled in the hay under the skittish clouds, all we could hear was the hooves of the horses and the harness bells. I'd made off with 2 cases of liquor that day, and the accumulating stash, like a can of gasoline on the stove, reminded me that I would have to come up with the guts to finish. Do you ever feel lonesome? Lola whispered. Yes, sometimes. I don't when I'm with you, she said, pressing her warm lips on my ear. I feel happy when I'm with you, like the world's a good place, she sounded. Is your mom still mad at you? I said. Yes, she thinks I should be going out with Tom. I rode through the sharp spring air under the silver clouds, and I cuddled with Lola, and I felt alone, and I couldn't quit thinking about little Jacob and Gretchen, and I hated Otto Letterman's guts, and I prayed I'd be brave enough to do what I had to do. The temptation to give it up came gliding out of nowhere like an owl, coaxing me to turn away from Gretchen and her insane family and cling to Lola, to enjoy my final days at Central with the girl I'd always loved. After we'd taken the girls home, I bombed out of the back seat when Steve dropped off Scott and told them I wanted to walk. I cut through the yards and alleys as if the runner was right on my tail, and when I hit my block, I knew no one could have followed me. At the alley, I stopped and I was breathing pretty hard. I crouched by McCluskey's wood fence and studied the distance to the back door of the apartment. A light wind whispered in the bare branches, and everything seemed normal, and the neighborhood shadows looked familiar and safe. I was about to sneak down the fence when a funny feeling stopped me, like I could feel someone watching me. Geez, I stood there sweating, and I couldn't make myself move, and I was scaring myself sick. McCluskey's wood fence on one side was a bare lilac hedge, and a garage on the other. 20 yards of alley, my alley, where I shot buckets and played for years. Crepes, I snapped out of and forced myself to leg it, holding my breath, telling myself I was imagining things. I tried to move quietly, but it sounded like I was walking on broken glass. When I passed the garage and the telephone pole with my backboard on it, I started breathing again, and the good old apartment building stood there solid in the night like a castle welcoming me home safe. Before I reached the door, his arm locked around my neck. Instantly, every muscle in my body fought him, elbow twisted and kicked, but he was really strong. Pain gagged in my throat. I tried to yell, but couldn't. and his iron grip crushed my strength out of me. He was dragging me backwards, and I thought he'd break my neck. There was no more air in this world. I couldn't fight him anymore. Spiraling down, down. Everything went black, and splintering daggers shot into my skull, and I knew I was dying. And I remembered thinking, he got me. Darn it, he got me. Then, like out of a dream, I heard Peggy's clear young voice. We've called the police. The police are on the way. We've called the police. Instantly, I was falling and my head hit the asphalt, but there was air in the world again. Sweet, precious air and breath. I found myself lying in the dark by the corner of the neighbor's garage, sputtering and gasping, and I saw Peggy tooling down the alley with a handful of lettuce and stuff. She never saw Letterman or me. Figuring she'd cleared the alley of evil without a clue that this time she had. I sat up and my throat felt like it was on fire, and I coughed up blood and my windpipe seemed to be caved in. I was woozy, but I had to get up and get to the apartment. Letterman might be back any second. Then it hit me. He wouldn't be back, calling his scrawny ass from home, thinking someone had actually called the police. I knew it was funny, but I couldn't laugh. Peggy hustled back through the alley, and I picked myself up and walked out of the shadows, a little bit wobbly. Hi, Cal. How was that hayride? It was fun, I said with a very strange voice. What's the matter? You been crying? No, I think I'm getting a cold, I said as we slipped quietly into the door to the back stairway. You probably got cold on the hayride, she whispered as we opened our apartment door. Yeah, did you see Hotfoot? No, but I left him lots of food. Good night, Cal. Peg, I said, and I reached out and hugged her. Don't, she said and pulled away. I don't want to get your cold. She tiptoed down the hall, and I wished I could thank her for saving my life. And I hoped someday that when Letterman was in jail, I could tell her what she had done. But for now, no one but Gretchen could know that I'd ever heard of Otto Letterman. I thought of calling the police and telling them he tried to kill me, but I never saw him, and his wife could lie and say he never left his home, and he'd get out of it, and then get Gretchen. Now I believe her. He'd kill her. I got a drink of water at the kitchen sink and tried to calm down, but I was shaking so hard I thought my teeth would rattle out, and I couldn't get over how my little sister had spooked Letterman and made him let go while there was still a few seconds of life left in me. I was breathing hard and sweating, and my heart was thumping, and I was still plenty scared, but I hated the guy, and now I knew I could do it, and there'd be no more putting it off, and I couldn't wait to nail him. I wanted to punch him in the face for trying to kill me. I wanted to hammer my body to him like Madman Fred Walker in tackling drills. I wanted to bury him. It was hard to swallow, but I drank a little more water and I was calming down some, and I sat at the kitchen table in the shadows, and it dawned on me that in the crazy way life works out, the little cottontail I'd saved last fall had just saved me, the bunny, and my wonderful sister.